instance, you have voted against many of the things that they voted for, including the transportation bill that withdrew some funds from Amtrak.
Yeah, well, you know what I found, Marvin? I'm representing 740,000 people that sent me there to represent them, not to represent the Republican Party. I am a Republican. I'm probably more moderate than some Republicans. But I never lost focus that when people ask me about Congress, I say it's a remarkable responsibility and an incredible privilege. And those two things I'll never forget. And the people that sent me down there sent me to represent them. The transportation bill was going to cut $250 million out of Amtrak. That's a lifeline for many people in our region. I take Amtrak back and forth to Washington. So I told the leadership that although they needed the votes, and it was a close vote, that I was a no vote because it hurt my district. I told them the same thing on the trade authority bill, that it's going to cost New Yorkers, it's going to cost a lot of people their jobs, and I wasn't in favor of it. It was a very close vote. In fact, the president came to Capitol Hill looking for votes to support his transportation authority proposal. I told leadership I was a no vote there. And right before we left, I voted no on the punishment for sanctuary cities. New York City is a sanctuary city. But the punishment...
Sanctuary city meaning what?
Meaning that the local government doesn't report illegal immigrants who are in the justice system to the federal authorities. It gives them a sanctuary. San Francisco's a sanctuary city. New York's a sanctuary city. The proposal was to cut federal funding for cities that didn't follow federal regulations and follow federal immigration laws by reporting people to the federal government. The punishment, though, was taking money from the police and from programs that would prevent violence against women. So I was opposed to the punishment. Last year, we used $32 million that they wanted to take away to buy vests for police officers in New York City and to protect women from further violence. That I was not going to stand for, so I voted no against my own party on that vote as well.
One of the key issues in this upcoming presidential campaign is the immigration reform, and that's been stalled for so long. Any chance that we can see this coming to any kind of a vote?
I would hope so, Marvin. I think everybody in Washington sees that we need to reform our immigration policies. I think the first thing we have to do is try to shorten the time period where we have thousands of people who have followed the rules and regulations that we've put in place. They filed the paperwork, they've done their background checks, and have been waiting a decade to become a citizen to this great country. And you know why? Because America is better than the place that they came from. And it takes too long. We have to reform. We have people who have legally tried to become a citizen of our country, and we're making that process too long. That's the first immigration reform. Then we have to do is we have to figure out what to do with the people who are already here illegally. I'm not in favor of deporting people, but I'm in favor of making a path to legalization with some penalties because they have broken the law, but we need to help those people become citizens legally.
You were part of a congressional delegation just returned from a visit to Israel, and you met with Prime Minister Netanyahu, talking about the Iran deal, and there's the great concern there because they feel so vulnerable. Can you share with us what Netanyahu shared with you?
It was amazing. The Prime Minister is a remarkable man who has an incredible love for his country and love for his people, and he's doing his best to protect them. Israel is a country that's about the size of New Jersey, and there's about 6.2 million Jews that live in Israel. They're surrounded by 330 million Arabs, and they're surrounded by Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon on the north, and the west, and excuse me, on the east, and then Gaza on the south. And rockets are launched at them every single day. And their biggest fear is Iran getting a nuclear weapon. And the Prime Minister said if he doesn't have any help, Israel will go it alone, but they will protect themselves. I think what's happening in the current administration, Marvin, is that our enemies are testing us, and our allies are questioning our allegiance to them. And the Prime Minister of Israel and the Israeli people deserve the American support and the support of this administration, which they're not feeling right now.
Let me go to something locally. It's now been a year. We've reached the one-year mark of the death of Eric Garner, and you were the district attorney at the time, and the grand jury chose not to indict. Yet there's still a federal grand jury is still sitting. What are your reflections a year later?
You know, Eric Garner's death was a tragedy to his mother, to his wife, and to his children. And no one wanted or expected Eric Garner to die that day over a year ago. The federal government now is looking into whether or not Eric Garner's civil rights were violated. That's different than the investigation the grand jury did on Staten Island. They haven't concluded that investigation as of yet.
Any way you would have acted differently with the grand jury? Because your critics say that you really could have imposed more of your will on a grand jury to have gotten an indictment in this case.
Yeah, I may have been able to impose my will. That's not the role of a district attorney. We don't want district attorneys. Our forefathers were smart enough to realize how powerful government's hand was, and they didn't want a government official accusing people. They wanted a person's peers, 23 people in a grand jury deciding somebody's criminal liability or not. They were very, very smart 230, 240 years ago. So we put the case in the grand jury's hands. We presented every piece of evidence that we had. They reached their conclusion after deliberating. They sat for 9 weeks. They heard 50 witnesses, 60 pieces of evidence that they saw. They reached that conclusion, and they're the only people who are actually in the grand jury.
And we're still yet to hear from a federal grand jury. I have to ask you this. Presidential politics, Donald Trump, does this surprise you that he is the front runner and going on for so many weeks now?
I think what Mr. Trump is resonating with so many voters is because he's saying things that they're frustrated with. They're frustrated with their government. We have a lot of good candidates. There's 17 Republicans right now in the race. There's accomplished business people, accomplished United States senators, accomplished governors. I think at some point the field will thin out, but I think the rise of Mr. Trump and the rise of Mr. Sanders in the Democratic Party is because people are just frustrated and they're hearing things that they're feeling at home. They're being verbalized now by candidates for president.
Who do you think will be the Republican candidate?
I have absolutely no idea. There's 17 of them right now. I don't know if they're finished. I don't know if we're going to see more announcing.
Well, while you've been dealing with the affairs of the country and Congress, you've been dealing with an affair closer to home, and she's only 2 months old. Aniela Rose Catherine, your daughter.
My daughter, 58 years old. I had my very first baby on May 19th. And I don't want to tell this to your viewers, Marvin, but she's replaced television in our lives. We just stare at her. She makes us laugh. She makes us cry. She makes us smile. She's a joy. When people told me the greatest thing that ever happened to them in their lives were their children, now I've experienced that.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you, my friend.
And thanks so much for coming in. It's always good to have you here.
Good to be with you, Marvin. Thank you.
And we're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about that whole controversy over the topless painted ladies in Times Square. We'll be right back.